The sky above New York City did not just change color. It tore open like a piece of cheap fabric. There was no warning. There were no clouds gathering to hint at a storm. 1 second, the sun was shining on the metal letters of the Vought tower. The next second, a hole in reality screamed open with a sound that shattered glass for 10 blocks. It was a violet tear in the world, bleeding energy that tasted like copper in the air. This was not a stunt. This was not a movie promo. It was a violent intrusion. The alarms inside the tower blared, but they were too late. The force of the arrival hit the building like a hammer. Inside the main conference room, on the 99th floor, the long mahogany table shook violently. A cup of water fell over and spilled onto the expensive carpet. Homelander stopped speaking mid-sentence. He looked at the window, his jaw tight. He was annoyed. He thought it was another supersonic jet breaking the rules, or maybe a super terrorist trying to make a statement. He did not feel fear. He never felt fear. He only felt irritation that his meeting was interrupted. He walked to the window, ready to burn whatever it was out of the sky. The other members of the Seven stayed in their seats, looking confused and nervous. They waited for Homelander to tell them how to feel. Then the impact happened. Something shot out of the purple tear in the sky and slammed into the side of the building near the top. Concrete turned to dust instantly. Steel beams bent like wet noodles. The entire skyscraper groaned under the weight of the hit. Dust and smoke billowed out, covering the view of the city. Homelander frowned. He could hear a heartbeat inside the smoke. It was fast. It was terrified. But it was strong. Stronger than a normal human. Stronger than most supers he knew. Out in the smoke, Izuku Midoriya was falling. He was spinning through the air, his body screaming in pain. The last thing he remembered was the final clash with the villain Shigaraki. The feeling of space twisting, and then this cold air. He tried to grab onto something with his black whip quirk, but his powers were lagging. They felt heavy, like trying to run underwater. He saw the glass building and realized he was about to hit the street. He forced his legs to move. Green lightning crackled around his skin, ripping through the sleeves of his damaged hero suit. He kicked the air, using the pressure to slow his fall. He landed on a stone ledge jutting out from the building, crushing the stone to powder with his grip. He was panting hard. Blood ran down his forehead into his left eye. He looked down at the city. It looked like a big city back home, but wrong. The signs were in English. The cars were different. The people screaming below sounded different. His danger sense quirk flared up, a sharp stab in the back of his skull that hurt worse than a migraine. He looked up. The smoke cleared. Floating 10 feet away was a man in a blue suit with a red, white, and blue cape. The man was hovering without effort. He looked perfect, like a statue come to life. But Izuku saw his eyes. They were blue, but they were cold. There was no warmth in them. There was no concern for the falling debris or the screaming people below. The man just looked at Izuku like he was a stain on a nice shirt. Izuku tried to speak. He tried to ask where he was, but the man's eyes began to glow bright red. The heat coming off them made the air shimmer. Izuku realized in that split second that this man was not a hero. He was a predator, and Izuku was in his territory. The boy braced himself, his power flooding his veins, preparing for a fight he did not understand. The red light flared in Homelander's eyes, a precursor to the lethal beams that had bisected planes and severed steel like butter. Izuku Midoriya did not need to know this man's name or his history to understand the intent. The intent was death. Danger sense screamed so loudly in Izuku's skull that it momentarily drowned out the sirens wailing from the street below. He did not think. He reacted. One for all flooded his legs at 45%, the green lightning tearing through the fabric of his trousers. He pushed off the ledge with enough force to crack the concrete foundation of the floor they stood on. Two beams of concentrated heat slashed through the space where Izuku's head had been a microsecond before. The lasers struck the glass facade of the adjacent office, blowing out the windows in a shower of molten shards. Izuku was in the air, spinning, his mind racing to analyze the threat. This was a villain. It had to be. A villain wearing a cape, hovering in the sky, attacking a civilian without provocation. Izuku extended his left hand, black tendrils of energy shooting out from his fingertips. Black Whip latched onto a flagpole jutting from the 30th story of the tower. He hauled himself around the corner of the building, swinging hard to break the line of sight. Homelander watched the boy vanish around the bend. He blinked, the red glow fading, replaced by a look of genuine confusion that quickly curdled into rage. He had missed. He never missed. And the boy had flown. Not like he flew with simple anti-gravity propulsion, but by swinging on weird black ropes that came out of his skin. It was disgusting. It was messy. Homelander launched himself forward, the sonic boom of his acceleration shattering the remaining windows on the floor. He rounded the corner instantly, scanning the air. Izuku was clinging to the side of the building, panting. He felt heavier here. Gravity felt more oppressive. Or perhaps the dimensional transit had sapped his stamina. He saw the blue streak tear around the corner and realized he could not outrun this man. The man was faster than a fighter jet. Izuku needed cover. He engaged the third user's quirk. F.A. Jin built up kinetic energy in his legs as he crouched against the glass. When Homelander spotted him and dove, eyes lighting up again, Izuku released the energy. He didn't jump away. He jumped through. He smashed through the reinforced glass of the 45th floor, tucking into a roll as he hit the carpet of an empty law office. Homelander stopped outside the broken window, hovering. He could hear the boy inside. He could hear the heart rate, erratic and fast. He floated forward, drifting into the room, his boots crunching on the glass. He looked around the empty cubicles. "Come out," he said, his voice calm but laced with the frequency that vibrated in Izuku's chest. "You are trespassing on Vought property. You are a super terrorist. There is nowhere to go. I can hear your blood pumping." Izuku was hiding behind a heavy oak desk, clutching his side. The term super terrorist confused him. He was a hero student. He tried to formulate a plan. He could not fight for power in a building. The structure would collapse. There were people downstairs. He had to de-escalate. He stood up slowly, raising his hands. The green lightning faded. He looked at the man in the cape. "I am not a terrorist," Izuku said, his voice trembling slightly, but his gaze firm. "My name is Deku. I am a hero. I don't know how I got here. I don't want to fight you." Homelander looked at the boy. The costume was tattered. The kid looked like a mess. Green hair, big eyes. He looked pathetic. "A hero," Homelander repeated, savoring the word like a bad joke. He stepped closer, his cape settling around his shoulders. "I am the hero. I am the only hero that matters. You are just a chaotic variable, and I hate chaos." Homelander flicked his wrist, a backhand motion that looked casual. Izuku's danger sense flared, but the speed was deceptive. The blow connected with Izuku's forearm as he raised it to block. The impact was like being hit by a high-speed train. Izuku was launched backward, smashing through the drywall, through the break room, and slamming into the elevator shaft doors at the core of the building. The metal doors buckled around him. Izuku coughed, tasting iron. His forearm was bruised, the bone vibrating from the stress. This man's physical strength rivaled all might. It was raw, unrefined, but overwhelming. Izuku realized that talking was death. This man had no code. He was a narcissist with the power of a god. Izuku needed to vanish. He pried the elevator doors open and looked down the dark shaft. He could hear the hum of the car rising. He looked up to see Homelander tearing through the walls, walking in a straight line toward him, lazily destroying the infrastructure of the building. Izuku activated the sixth user's quirk, smokescreen. Thick purple smoke exploded from Izuku's body, filling the hallway and the elevator shaft instantly. It was dense and choked the air. Homelander stopped, waving his hand in front of his face. He coughed. He tried to use his X-ray vision, but the smoke was particulate matter, dense enough to scatter the light and obscure the visual. He fired his lasers blindly into the smoke, sweeping the room. The beams sliced through walls and ceilings, igniting fires. But he heard nothing. The heartbeat was gone. Izuku was falling down the elevator shaft, using Black Whip to slow his descent, keeping silent. He reached the ground floor, forced the doors open, and sprinted into the lobby. Panic had already set in. People were screaming, running for the exits. Debris was falling outside. Izuku blended into the crowd, keeping his head down, the tattered hood of his costume pulled up. He burst out onto the street, the noise of New York City assaulting his senses. It was louder, angrier, and dirtier than the cities he knew. He didn't stop. He ran until his lungs burned, weaving through alleys, putting miles between him and the tower. High above, in the ruined conference room of Vought Tower, Ashley Barrett was screaming into a phone. The seven were in chaos. The Deep was trying to hide under the table. Queen Maeve was pouring herself a drink, her hand shaking slightly. Homelander flew back in through the broken window, landing heavily. The room went silent. He looked at them. His uniform was spotless, save for a calm layer of dust. "It's handled," Homelander lied. His voice was tight. He walked to the head of the table. It was a space debris impact. A satellite. I caught most of it, but some pieces got through. That's the story. Ashley lowered the phone, her eyes wide. But Homelander, people saw a person. There's footage from the street. Someone falling. Green lightning. Twitter is trending #AlienBoy. We can't just say it was a satellite. Homelander turned to her. His eyes did not glow, but the threat was there, heavy in the room. Then it was a super terrorist, he corrected, his voice dropping an octave. A new villain from the east. He attacked the tower. I repelled him. He is wounded and on the run. He is dangerous. If anyone sees him, they are not to engage. They call Vought. They call me. He looked out the window at the city. He was vibrating with unreleased aggression. He had let someone get away. A child who took a punch that would have liquefied a normal soup. He needed to find this Deku, and he needed to rip him apart to see what made him tick. 3 hours later, Izuku sat huddled in the corner of a damp alleyway in Queens. It was raining now, a cold grey drizzle that soaked through his ruined costume. He had found a discarded tarp and wrapped it around his shoulders. He was shivering, not just from the cold, but from the shock. He had checked his pockets. He had his phone, but it had no signal. The network didn't exist here. He had no money. His hero license was a piece of plastic that meant nothing. He watched the people walking by the mouth of the alley. They looked tired. They looked angry. In his world, even with the villain threat, there was a sense of societal cohesion. Heroes were public servants. Here, the billboards told a different story. He saw an electronic ad on a bus stop. It showed the man who had attacked him, Homelander, holding a bottle of perfume. The slogan read, "Send of a savior. Buy now." Izuku frowned. Heroes didn't sell perfume. They didn't have corporate sponsorships. He remembered Uraraka's family struggles, the financial aspect of hero work. But this was different. This was industry. This was a monopoly on safety. He shifted, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. He needed information. He needed to know the rules of this reality. A scream echoed from deeper in the alley. It was a sound Izuku knew well. Fear. He stood up, ignoring the pain. Hero or not, stranger or not, he could not ignore a cry for help. He moved silently, the soles of his iron boots making no sound on the wet pavement. Around the bend, 3 men were cornering a woman against a dumpster. One of them had a knife. It was a standard mugging. In a world of flying men and laser eyes, the petty crime remained the same. Izuku didn't announce himself. He didn't have the energy for a speech. He moved with the speed of a bullet. He appeared between the knifeman and the woman. He grabbed the attacker's wrist, applying just enough pressure to force the fingers open. The knife clattered to the ground. The man shouted in surprise, swinging a wild punch. Izuku ducked under it and swept the man's legs, sending him crashing into the puddles. The other 2 men hesitated, seeing the green sparks dancing around this strange, ragged boy. "Get out of here," Izuku said, his voice low. The thugs didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled over the fence and ran. Izuku turned to the woman, offering a hand. "Are you okay?" he asked, trying to smile. Trying to be the symbol of peace All Might taught him to be. The woman didn't take his hand. She pressed herself back against the dumpster, her eyes wide with terror. She looked at his glowing skin, the black tendrils retracting into his arms. "Please," she whispered, "I don't have any money. Don't hurt me. I won't tell anyone I saw a soup. I promise. Just let me go." Izuku froze. She wasn't afraid of the muggers anymore. She was afraid of him, because he had power. In this world, power didn't mean safety for the weak. It meant danger. It meant collateral damage. He lowered his hand. "Go," he said softly. The woman bolted, running out of the alley without looking back. Izuku stood alone in the rain. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had saved her, but he hadn't saved her from the fear. The system here was broken. The trust between the powerful and the powerless didn't exist. He sat back down on a crate, feeling a profound loneliness wash over him. He was truly alone. Across the city, in a basement beneath a pawn shop in the Flatiron district, the air smelled of stale beer and gunpowder. William Billy Butcher sat in front of a bank of monitors, his boots up on the desk. He was watching the leaked cell phone footage from the street outside Vought Tower. It was shaky, vertical video, but it showed what he needed to see. A figure falling, green lightning, the impact that cracked the street, and then the brief glimpse of the face before the figure vanished into the crowd. It was a kid who looked terrified. Mother's Milk stood behind him, crossing his huge arms. "That ain't one of ours," Mem said, his voice deep and thoughtful. "Vaught's already spinning it. They're calling him a foreign terrorist. But look at the body language, Butcher. The kid was running. He was retreating." Butcher took a drag from a cigarette, the ember glowing in the dim light. He leaned forward, pausing the video on the frame where Homelander hovered above the street. He zoomed in on Homelander's face. The resolution was grainy, but Butcher knew that face better than his own. He knew every tick, every micro-expression of the narcissist. "Look at his eyes, Butcher rumbled, his accent thick. "That ain't the look of a man who just won a fight. That's the look of a man who's been embarrassed. That's the look of a man who hit something he couldn't break. Frenchie slid into the room, holding a tablet. I have analyzed the energy signature from the tower sensors, he said, his frantic energy filling the space. It is bizarre, Butcher. It is not Compound 5. The radioactive decay is missing. The biological markers are completely different. This energy, it is bioelectric, but it acts like a stockpiled resource. It is ancient. Butcher smirked, a cruel, sharp expression. So we've got a soup that ain't a soup. A kid who went toe-to-toe with the Homelander and walked away, and Vought is terrified of him. He stood up, grabbing his trench coat from the back of the chair. We're going to find this lad, Butcher said. Before Vought does, MM asked. Before Vought puts a bullet in his brain, Butcher corrected. If this kid can hurt Homelander, then he's the weapon we've been waiting for. Or he's the biggest bloody bomb to hit this city since the 70s. Either way, he belongs to us now. Back in the alley, Izuku tried to activate the vestige world to talk to the previous users, to ask Nana Shimura or All Might for guidance. But the connection was silent. It was as if the frequency was jammed. The air in this dimension was too thick with cynicism. Or perhaps the physics simply didn't allow for the spiritual connection to manifest clearly. He was cut off from the wisdom of the past. He had to rely on his own intellect. He needed a base. He needed food. He needed to hide. He remembered the layout of the city was similar to his own world's pre-Quirk history books. If this was New York, there were subways. There were abandoned tunnels. He stood up, wrapping the tarp tighter. He would go underground. As he moved to the manhole cover near the alley entrance, his danger sense pricked again. Not the screaming alarm of a direct attack, but the low, buzzing hum of surveillance. He looked up. A pigeon was sitting on the fire escape. It looked normal, but the way it tracked him was mechanical. Izuku narrowed his eyes. He didn't know about Vaught's surveillance capabilities, but he knew what it felt like to be hunted. He lifted the manhole cover with one hand, the heavy iron feeling like cardboard. He slipped into the darkness of the sewer system, pulling the lid shut above him. Minutes later, a black van pulled up to the mouth of the alley. The back doors opened, and Black Noir stepped out. He stood completely still, the rain sliding off his armor. He looked at the dumpster where the mugging had happened. He looked at the crate where Izuku had sat. He tilted his head, listening. He could hear the faint scuff of boots on concrete deep below the street. Noir tapped his earpiece, sending a signal back to the tower. He had the scent. He didn't run. He didn't rush. He walked to the manhole cover and lifted it silently. He dropped into the dark, a silent shadow pursuing a spark of lightning. Izuku moved through the tunnels, the smell of sewage stinging his nose. He used the ambient light from street grates to navigate. He was hungry. His metabolic rate was high because of One for All. He needed thousands of calories to function, and he was running on empty. He felt a wave of dizziness and leaned against the wet brick wall. Focus, he whispered to himself. You faced Shigaraki. You faced All for One. You can survive this. He heard a splash behind him. It was soft, almost imperceptible. Izuku spun around, raising his fists. The tunnel was dark, stretching back into the gloom. Who's there? He called out. Silence answered him, but his danger sense was buzzing at the base of his skull. It was a cold sensation. Something was here. Something that didn't think, didn't feel, just acted. Black Noir dropped from the ceiling of the tunnel, landing in a crouch 10 feet away. He held 2 curved knives. He said nothing. The visual of the dark hero was terrifying. A void in the shape of a man. Izuku analyzed the opponent instantly. No monologue, no posturing, efficient movement. This was an assassin. Vought sent you? Izuku asked. Noir lunged. He was fast, faster than the thugs, faster than most pros back home. He closed the distance in a blink, the knives slashing toward Izuku's throat. Izuku activated full cowl at 5%, dodging backward. The knife tip grazed his chin, drawing a thin line of blood. Izuku countered with a low kick, aiming to sweep Noir's legs. Noir anticipated it, leaping over the leg and driving a knee toward Izuku's face. Izuku blocked with his forearms, the impact driving his boots into the sludge of the tunnel floor. This guy was strong, superhumanly strong. Izuku used the impact to backflip away, creating distance. Black Whip shot out, grabbing a pipe overhead. Izuku pulled himself up, hanging from the ceiling. Noir stopped, looking up. He didn't throw the knives. He reached into his belt and pulled out small, spherical grenades. He tossed them casually. Izuku's eyes widened. Explosives in a confined space. This guy was crazy. Izuku released the whip and dropped, kicking the grenades away mid-air before they detonated. The explosion rocked the tunnel, sending a shockwave of water and filth in both directions. The noise was deafening. Smoke filled the tunnel. Izuku coughed, his ears ringing. He couldn't see Noir. Danger sense spiked to the left. Izuku twisted, barely catching Noir's wrist as the assassin tried to stab him in the kidney. They grappled in the dark water. Noir's strength was immense, silent and unyielding. Izuku gritted his teeth, channeling 20% into his arm. He threw Noir off him, slamming the assassin into the brick wall. The wall cracked. Noir slumped for a second, then stood up as if nothing happened. He cracked his neck. Izuku panted. This wasn't a fight he could win by attrition. He was tired, hungry, and bleeding. He needed to escape. He looked down the tunnel. The explosion had likely weakened the structure. "I'm sorry," Izuku muttered. He reached back and flicked his fingers, unleashing a Delaware Smash Air Force blast at the ceiling above Noir. The bricks gave way, and tons of earth and street debris collapsed into the tunnel, creating a barrier between them. Izuku didn't wait to see if Noir was buried. He turned and ran deeper into the dark, clutching his side. He had escaped the immediate threat, but he knew the truth now. Vought had eyes everywhere, and they had monsters that didn't stop. He emerged from a drainage pipe miles away, near the docks. The rain had stopped. The night air was cold. He saw a van parked near the water. The side door slid open. A man with a beard and a trench coat stood there. He held a lit cigarette. "Get in, son," the man said, before the silent bloke digs himself out. Izuku froze, ready to fight. "Who are you?" "The name's Butcher," the man said, stepping aside to reveal the interior of the van. "And I reckon we both hate the man in the blue suit." Izuku looked at Butcher. He looked at the van. His danger sense was quiet. It wasn't registering a threat from this man. Caution, yes, but not immediate danger. Izuku was exhausted. He had no other options. He stepped toward the van. "I'm looking for a way home," Izuku said. Butcher grinned, a wolfish baring of teeth. "Well," Butcher said, "I can't promise you home, kid, but I can promise you a chance to hurt the bastards who are keeping you here." Izuku climbed into the van. The door slid shut, sealing out the city lights. The engine roared to life, and the van sped away into the night, carrying the lost hero into the heart of a war he did not yet understand. The fluorescent lights of the basement hummed with a low, irritating buzz that grated on Izuku's nerves. He sat on a metal folding chair, his hands resting on his knees, watching the group of people arguing in front of him. He was shivering slightly, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. The man named Butcher was pacing. a lit cigarette dangling from his lips, smoke curling up to the peeling ceiling. The tall man, Mother's Milk, was cleaning a rifle with methodical, calm movements that terrified Izuku more than the shouting. The Frenchman was fiddling with a chemistry set, glancing at Izuku every few seconds with manic curiosity, and the skinny one, Huey, looked like he wanted to vomit. Izuku took a deep breath. He needed to establish a baseline. He was in a world where heroes were products. He had learned that much in the 30-minute van ride. They weren't chosen. They were made. A substance called compound vibe. It sounded like a quirk singularity drug, but worse. It was corporate. Butcher stopped pacing and slammed his hand on the table. He leaned into Izuku's face. The smell of tobacco and stale coffee was overwhelming. Butcher demanded to know what Vought was paying him. He wanted to know if Izuku was a sleeper agent, a clone, or a secret weapon grown in a vat in New Jersey. Izuku met Butcher's gaze. He didn't flinch. He had stared down all for one. A man in a trench coat was not going to break him. Izuku explained again. He was from Japan. He was a student at UA, high school. He had been fighting a villain with a spatial quirk. He fell. He landed here. He did not know what Vought was until 3 hours ago. He did not know what Compound 5 was. His power came from a lineage of heroes who passed it down to protect the innocent. Butcher laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. He called it a fairy tale. He said there were no innocent soups. He said power makes people rot from the inside out. He pointed at the screen on the wall. The news was playing. The ticker at the bottom read, "Alien terrorist attack in Manhattan." The screen showed the hole in the Vought Tower. It showed a blurry photo of Izuku's face. The anchor was saying that the attacker, known only as the Green Bastard, was a radical anti-American super-terrorist allied with foreign insurgencies. They claimed he carried a radioactive virus. Izuku stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. They were lying. It wasn't just a spin. It was a fabrication. They were turning the public against him to justify a kill order. He looked at Huey. The young man was watching him with a mix of fear and curiosity. Izuku asked if this was normal. Huey nodded slowly. He said Vought controlled the narrative. If they said Izuku was a virus, then by tomorrow, people would be wearing masks to protect themselves from him. Frenchie stepped forward, holding a vial of Izuku's blood that he had taken earlier. He looked puzzled. He told Butcher that the boy was telling the truth, at least about the biology. There was no V in his system. The cellular structure was different. The mitochondria were hyperactive, generating bioelectricity naturally, not chemically. He said Izuku was a biological impossibility in their world. He was organic. Butcher frowned. He didn't like variables he couldn't control, but he liked the weapon that Homelander couldn't track. Butcher outlined the situation. Vought would be hunting him. They had cameras on every corner. They had satellites. They had the 7. If Izuku went outside, he was dead. Butcher proposed a deal. Izuku helps them kill a few soups, helps them expose Vought, and Butcher helps him find a way home, or at least keeps him alive long enough to figure it out. Izuku shook his head. He refused to kill. He was a hero. He would fight to protect, but he would not execute people. He would not become a murderer to survive. Butcher sneered. He called Izuku a child playing a game in a slaughterhouse. The argument escalated. Izuku stood up, green lightning flickering around his skin. The room went silent. Mother's Milk put his hand on the rifle. And suddenly, Izuku's danger sense flared. It wasn't the sharp stab of an attack. It was a throbbing, heavy pressure. It was coming from the news feed. He looked at the screen. A press conference was starting. A woman in a white dress with gold stars was standing at a podium. Starlight. She looked sad. She looked sincere. She was reading from a teleprompter. She pleaded with the confused young man to turn himself in to the nearest Vought facility for treatment. She said he was sick. She said he was leaking radiation that would kill children if he stayed in the city. Izuku felt a knot in his stomach. She looked like a real hero. She looked kind, but she was lying for them. The manipulation made him feel sick. Then, the broadcast cut to a live feed. It was a residential street in Queens. Vought tactical teams were dragging families out of an apartment building. The reporter said they had tracked the terrorist's energy signature to this neighborhood. They were sanitizing the area. Izuku recognized the street. It was near the alley where he had arrived. They weren't finding him. They were punishing the neighborhood to draw him out. They were threatening civilians. Izuku turned to the door. Butcher blocked his path. He told the kid to sit down. He said it was a trap. He said Vought knew he had a hero complex. They were baiting him. If he went out there, he died, and the people died anyway. Izuku looked at Butcher. He said that a hero does not sit and watch while innocents are hurt. He said that if he didn't go, he was no better than the people in the tower. He activated full cowl. The air pressure in the basement dropped. Butcher hesitated. He saw something in the kid's eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. Determination without ego. Izuku moved. He didn't attack Butcher. He simply moved around him with a burst of speed that ruffled Butcher's trench coat. He was gone before the door fully swung shut. Butcher cursed. He grabbed his rifle. He told the boys to gear up. They were going to the kill box. Not to save the kid, he claimed, but to see what happened when an unstoppable force met the Vought object. Izuku moved across the rooftops of New York. He kept low. He moved fast. The rain had started again. He ignored the pain in his ribs. He ignored the hunger. He focused on the destination. The smoke rising from Queens guided him. As he got closer, he saw the scene. Black SUVs blocked the street. Men in tactical gear with Vought logos were holding people at gunpoint. They were scanning them with devices that looked like Geiger counters. It was theater. Cruel theater. Izuku landed on a water tower overlooking the street. He scanned the area. He counted 20 soldiers. No supers visible, but his danger sense was humming. Someone was waiting. He couldn't go in blindly. He needed a distraction. He saw a fire hydrant on the corner. He flicked a finger, sending a condensed shot of air pressure. The Delaware smash hit the valve. The hydrant exploded, sending a high-pressure jet of water into the line of soldiers. Confusion erupted. Izuku dropped. He moved like a phantom. He didn't hit them hard enough to break bones, just enough to incapacitate. He struck nerve clusters. He shattered rifles with his grip. In 10 seconds, 12 soldiers were down. The civilians screamed and ran. Izuku stood in the center of the street, the water from the hydrant raining down on him. He shouted for the rest of them to leave. Then the ground shook. A blur of blue and silver slammed into Izuku from behind. There was no warning from danger sense because the attacker wasn't acting with malice, but with sheer, drug-fueled instinct. It was A-Train. The speedster didn't stop. He tackled Izuku, dragging him along the pavement at 400 miles per hour. Izuku's back scraped against the asphalt, sparks flying. He gritted his teeth, grabbed A-Train's arm, and used the momentum to flip them both. They tumbled into a parked car, crushing it. A-Train rolled to his feet instantly. He was vibrating. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. He looked manic. He laughed, a jittery, high-pitched sound. He said he found the alien. He said he was going to be the one to cash in the chips. He didn't look like a professional. He looked like an addict. Izuku stood up, wiping blood from his mouth. He analyzed the opponent. Speed type, faster than Ida, faster than Gran Torino, but he was sloppy. He was overcommitting. Izuku activated danger sense to predict the path. A-Train vanished. Izuku ducked. A fist occupied the space where his head had been. Izuku countered with a sweeping kick, but A-Train was already gone. The fight became a game of attrition. A-Train was running circles around Izuku, literally. He created a vacuum vortex. The air was sucked out of the center. Izuku couldn't breathe. Debris began to lift off the ground. Izuku realized he couldn't match the speed, so he had to control the terrain. He smashed the ground with a Detroit smash. The pavement shattered. Huge slabs of concrete jutted up, breaking the smooth surface A-Train needed to run. A-Train stumbled. He hit a slab of concrete at supersonic speed. His knee buckled. He screamed, spinning out of control. He was heading straight for a gas station on the corner. The civilians who had fled were huddled near it. If A-Train hit the pumps at that speed, the kinetic energy alone would detonate the underground tanks. Izuku didn't think about the trap. He didn't think about the cameras recording from the news helicopters hovering above. He thought about the people. He pushed one for all to 45%. The pain in his limbs was blinding. He launched himself. He wasn't aiming for A-Train. He was aiming for the space between A-Train and the pumps. He arrived a fraction of a second before the speedster. Izuku fired Black Whip. The black tendrils wrapped around A-Train's torso. Izuku planted his feet, digging his iron soles into the asphalt. He had to act as the brake. The force of the deceleration was catastrophic. A-Train weighed as much as a normal man, but at that speed, his relativistic mass was enormous. The whips went taut. Izuku screamed as his shoulders threatened to dislocate. He halted A-Train inches from the pumps, but the energy had to go somewhere. The shockwave of the sudden stop exploded outward from Izuku's body. It was a concussive blast of displaced air. The blast wave hit the gas station structure. The roof collapsed. The glass shattered, but the tanks held. Izuku had saved the villain. He had saved the gas station. He slumped, dropping A-Train, was groaning on the ground, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Izuku gasped for air, his vision blurry. Then he heard the cracking sound. He looked up. The shockwave hadn't just hit the gas station. It had hit the old brick apartment building across the narrow street. The foundation, already weakened by years of neglect, gave way under the air pressure blast. The front of the building sheared off. Tons of brick and mortar rained down. It rained down on the crowd of people who had been watching. Izuku's eyes widened. He tried to move. He tried to reach them, but he was burned out. His muscles were locked. He watched in slow motion as the rubble buried the sidewalk. He watched the dust cloud rise, grey and choking. Silence followed the roar. Then the screams began. Muffled, pained screams from beneath the bricks. Izuku stumbled forward. He fell to his knees. He had caused this. He had saved the attacker, and his power had destroyed the bystanders. He crawled toward the pile. He had to dig them out. A spotlight hit him. The news helicopter was low, the wind from its rotors whipping the dust. A voice amplified by a speaker boomed from the sky. It was Homelander. He descended slowly, landing on top of the pile of rubble. He looked at the devastation. He looked at the cameras. He looked at Izuku. He acted heartbroken. He looked at the camera with tears in his eyes. He pointed at Izuku. He said the monster did this. He said the alien attacked the innocent people of Queens because they refused to hide him. He said A-Train tried to stop him, tried to save them. And look, he pointed to the crippled speedster. He paid the price. The crowd that had survived gathered around. They didn't see Izuku saving the gas station. They saw the green lightning. They felt the shockwave. They saw their homes destroyed. A bottle flew from the crowd and smashed against Izuku's head. Then a brick. People were shouting. Monster. Terrorist. Killer. Izuku looked at them. His heart broke. Not the way it broke when Bakugo yelled at him, but deeper. This was a rejection of his very existence. He tried to speak. He tried to say he was sorry, but the words choked him. Danger sense was screaming. Homelander was walking toward him. The look in Homelander's eyes was triumphant. He had won without throwing a punch. He had turned the hero into a villain. A smoke grenade landed between them. Thick, white phosphorus smoke exploded, blinding the cameras and the crowd. A van screeched around the corner, plowing through the debris. The side door flew open. Butcher was there, hanging out, an assault rifle in one hand. "Get in, you stupid sod," Butcher screamed, "or stay here and let them mount your head on the wall." Izuku looked at Homelander, who was casually blowing the smoke away with his breath. He looked at the people throwing rocks. He realized he could not save them today. If he stayed, he died, and the truth died with him. He scrambled into the van. The tires spun, smoking against the asphalt. The van fishtailed and sped away, dodging a laser blast that melted the rear bumper. Inside the van, silence reigned. Izuku sat on the floor, his head in his hands. He was covered in the dust of the building he had destroyed. Butcher didn't mock him. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He looked in the rearview mirror at the shaking kid. He saw the realization hitting the boy. The realization that good intentions in a bad world were just another kind of bomb. Huey handed Izuku a bottle of water. Izuku didn't take it. He stared at his hands. They were trembling. "I killed them," Izuku whispered. Butcher's eyes met his in the mirror. "Vought killed them," Butcher said, his voice hard as iron. "But you pulled the trigger. Welcome to the war, kid. Now stop crying and start getting angry." The van disappeared into the labyrinth of the city, leaving the tragedy behind to be rewritten by the victors. The narrative was set. Deku was not a hero. He was the greatest threat America had ever faced. And in the tower, Stan Edgar signed a document authorizing the deployment of payback. The escalation had begun. The smell of cheap whiskey and ozone hung heavy in the air of the underground bunker. It had been 48 hours since the collapse in Queens. 48 hours since Izuku Midoriya became the most hated man in America. He sat on a rusted cot, his knees pulled to his chest, staring at the concrete floor. He was not crying. He had passed the point of tears. His eyes were dry and bloodshot, fixed on a singular microscopic crack in the cement. In his mind, he replayed the moment the building fell. He calculated the vector of his smash. He calculated the structural integrity of the brick. He realized his mistake. He had applied the physics of his world to this one. In his world, materials were reinforced, evolved, stronger. Here, everything was made of paper. He was a cannon firing inside a glass house. Butcher stood over him, cleaning a jagged combat knife with a rag. He didn't look sympathetic. He looked impatient. He kicked the leg of the cot. He told the kid to wake up. He said self-pity was a luxury for people who weren't being hunted by a god. Izuku didn't move. He asked, in a voice that sounded like grinding stones, why Butcher had saved him. He said he was dangerous. He said he killed those people. Butcher stopped cleaning the knife. He leaned down, his face inches from Izuku's. He said Vought killed those people the moment they built a world where supermen answer to shareholders. He said Izuku was just the instrument, and instruments don't get to have feelings. They get pointed at the enemy. Frenchie interrupted them. He was holding a tablet and a soldering iron. He spoke fast, his words tumbling over each other. He had been analyzing the energy signature Izuku left behind. He called it a beacon. Every time Izuku used one for all, he emitted a unique bioelectric frequency that Vought satellites could track. That was how A-Train found them. If Izuku powered up again, they would pinpoint him in seconds. Frenchie said he could build a jammer, a harness that would dampen the signal, but he needed components. Specifically, he needed a high-grade pulsing emotional regulator chip. The only place to get one was a Vought subsidiary lab in New Jersey that specialized in managing Soup's aggressive tendencies. Izuku looked up. He asked if that meant they were helping people, if Vought was trying to cure the violence. Mother's Milk laughed from the corner. It was a dark, hollow sound. He told the boy that Vought didn't cure violence. They managed assets. They chipped Soups to make sure they didn't kill the wrong people, or to sedate them when their poll numbers dropped. He said the lab wasn't a hospital. It was a kennel. Butcher outlined the plan. They hit the lab. They steal the tech. Frenchie builds the harness. Then they go on the offensive. Izuku shook his head. He said he wouldn't fight. He wouldn't risk hurting anyone else. Butcher grabbed him by the collar of his ruined hero suit. He dragged him to the wall where a map of the city was pinned. He pointed to the red zones. He said Vought was tearing the city apart looking for him. They were kicking in doors in mutant sympathizer neighborhoods. They were detaining anyone with a foreign accent. He said Izuku's pacifism was getting more people hurt than his fists. If he wanted the bleeding to stop, he had to cauterize the wound. That meant hitting Vought so hard they flinched. Izuku looked at the map. He looked at the photos of the detained families. He felt the phantom pain of one for all buzzing in his veins. He realized Butcher was right. In this world, inaction was a choice that carried a body count. He nodded slowly. He would go, but he set a condition: no killing. They get the tech, and they leave. Butcher smirked. He didn't agree. He didn't disagree. He just walked away to load his rifle. The drive to New Jersey was silent. They took a beat-up maintenance van. Izuku sat in the back, meditated, trying to dial down his power output to 1%. He needed fine control. He needed to be surgical. He couldn't be a smash anymore. He had to be a scalpel. He wrapped his arms in fresh bandages Frenchie had provided, tightening them until his circulation slowed. It was a grounding technique. And ceci est of the walls. The facility was a nondescript warehouse in an industrial park. No Vought branding, no guards out front. It looked boring. But Izuku's danger sense was humming a low, steady note. There were threats inside, real ones. Frenchie bypassed the electronic lock on the side door. They slipped into a sterile white hallway. It smelled of antiseptic and bleach. They moved in a tactical formation. Butcher on point, MM covering the rear, Huey and Frenchie in the middle. Izuku floating silently above them, clinging to the ceiling pipes with Black Whip. They reached a central observation deck. Below them, through reinforced glass, was a large holding area. Izuku looked down and gasped. The sound was involuntary. The room below wasn't a lab. It was a nursery. There were rows of cribs. Inside the cribs were toddlers, but they weren't sleeping. They were floating. Some were glowing. One was phasing through the bars of the crib and getting shocked by an electric collar. Nurses in hazmat suits moved between them, injecting glowing blue liquid into their arms. Izuku dropped from the ceiling, landing softly next to Huey. His face was pale. He asked what this was. He asked why they were injecting babies. MM looked away, his jaw tight. He told Izuku the truth. This was how soups were made. They weren't born. They were injected with compound 5. Vought bought babies from desperate parents, injected them with a volatile chemical, and rolled the dice. Most died, some deformed. The ones that survived became products. The reality hit Izuku like a physical blow. His entire worldview, the foundation of his society back home, crumbled. In his world, quirks were a chaotic gift of evolution. Here, powers were a manufacturing process. Every hero he had seen, every villain, was a victim of corporate experimentation. Homelander wasn't a monster by nature. He was a lab rat that grew too big for the maze. The anger that rose in Izuku was cold. It wasn't the fiery passion of battle. It was a deep, freezing rage. He looked at Butcher. He asked where the chips were. Butcher pointed to a server room on the far side of the nursery. Izuku said he would get them, and then he was going to open the cages. Butcher grabbed his arm. He said no. He said they couldn't save the kids. Where would they take 50 superpowered toddlers? Vought would hunt them down. It would be a massacre. They were here for the chips. Izuku pulled his arm away. The fabric of his suit tore. He said he didn't care about the logistics. He wasn't leaving them. Before Butcher could argue, the alarm screamed. Red lights flooded the hallway. The PA system crackled. A voice, smooth and arrogant, echoed through the facility. "We know you're here, boys. And you brought the little green man. How exciting." The doors at the end of the hallway blew open. A ball of fire the size of a car roared down the corridor. Izuku stepped forward. He didn't use a smash. He used the second user's quirk, gear shift. He altered the speed of the air in front of him, creating a wall of localized high pressure. The fire hit the air wall and dissipated, washing around them harmlessly. Stepping through the smoke was the Crimson Countess. She wore red leather and a mask that hid her eyes but not her sneer. Flanking her was a man in a high-tech suit of grey armor, Tech Knight, and behind them, a dozen Vought security personnel with heavy energy weapons. Crimson Countess laughed. She looked at Izuku. She said he was smaller than he looked on TV. She raised her hands, gathering another fireball. She said she was going to burn the meat of his bones and see what color his skeleton was. Izuku didn't wait. He moved. He appeared in front of the security team. He didn't punch. He used Black Whip to grab their weapons, yanking them out of their hands and crushing the metal barrels. He swept their legs with a low kick at 5% power. They hit the ground hard, unconscious before they landed. Tech Knight lunged. His suit amplified his strength and analyzed fight patterns. He threw a punch aimed at Izuku's temple. Izuku saw the trajectory. He saw the weakness in the armor joints. He ducked, grabbed Tech Knight's wrist, and applied torque. The servo motors in the suit whined and snapped. Tech Knight shouted in surprise. Izuku didn't break the arm, but he broke the suit. He drove a palm strike into the chest plate, using a focused blast of air pressure to short-circuit the power core. Tech Knight froze, his armor locking up, turning him into a statue. Crimson Countess screamed. She fired blindly. Fireballs exploded against the walls, melting the steel beams. The sprinkler system engaged, spraying water everywhere. The steam hissed. Izuku moved through the steam like a ghost. He appeared behind her. She spun around, eyes wide. "You're just a kid," she stammered. Izuku looked at her. His eyes were glowing green. He said she was hurting children. He asked if she felt anything when she did it. She sneered and tried to blast him point blank. Izuku caught her wrists. Danger sense didn't even flare. She was too slow. He squeezed. Not enough to crush bone, but enough to trigger the pressure points. Her hands went numb. The fire died. He swept her legs and pinned her to the ground. He looked up at Butcher and the others. He told them to get the chips. He had the situation under control. Butcher walked over. He looked at the Crimson Countess, who was spitting curses at Izuku. Butcher raised his rifle. He aimed it at her head. Izuku's eyes widened. He shouted no. He jumped between Butcher and the woman. He said she was beaten. She was a prisoner. Heroes don't execute prisoners. Butcher lowered the gun, but he didn't lower his eyes. He told Izuku to look at her. Look at the uniform. Look at the lack of fear. She knew she was going to get out. She knew Vought lawyers would have her back on the street by dinner, and tomorrow she would burn down an orphanage to get to them. Butcher said this wasn't a comic book. There were no prisons for these people. The only way to stop them was to put them in the ground. While they argued, Tech Knight's suit rebooted. The emergency override engaged. A panel on his shoulder opened, and a micro-missile launched. It wasn't aimed at them. It was aimed at the glass wall of the nursery. Izuku saw it. Danger sense screamed. He moved faster than thought. He intercepted the missile in mid-air, clutching it against his chest. He curled his body around it, hardening his skin with black whip layers. The missile detonated. The explosion slammed Izuku into the ceiling. Smoke filled the room. He fell to the floor, coughing, his costume shredded, his chest burned. But the glass held. The babies were safe. Butcher didn't hesitate. He saw Tech Knight moving. He walked up to the frozen suit. He pulled a sticky bomb from his coat and slapped it onto the faceplate. Tech Knight screamed. Butcher walked away. Izuku shouted. He tried to get up. He tried to reach Tech Knight, but he was too far. The bomb detonated. The helmet and the head inside it vanished in a pink mist. Tech Knight's body slumped forward. Silence fell over the room. The only sound was the crying of the babies in the nursery below. Izuku stared at the headless body. He stared at Butcher. He felt bile rise in his throat. "You murdered him," Izuku whispered. Butcher looked at him. He lit a cigarette, his hand steady. He said he saved the team. He said Tech Knight would have brought the building down on top of them. He walked over to the Crimson Countess, who was now trembling, her bravado gone. She was staring at her partner's corpse. Butcher looked at Izuku. He said they were leaving. Now. Izuku stood up. He was shaking. He looked at the Crimson Countess. He looked at the babies. He realized he couldn't save everyone. He couldn't even save his enemies. He felt a crack in his soul, a fissure where his idealism used to be. He grabbed the Crimson Countess by the collar. She flinched. Izuku leaned in. He told her to run. He told her if she ever came after them again, if she ever hurt a child again, he wouldn't stop Butcher next time. He shoved her away. She scrambled back, slipping on the wet floor, and ran out the door. They raided the server room. Frenchie grabbed the chips. They ran for the van. As they sped away from the industrial park, the sky behind them lit up, not with fire, but with laser light. Homelander had arrived. They saw his silhouette hovering over the warehouse. He floated down into the hole in the roof. Inside the van, Huey was vomiting in a bucket. MM was bandaging a cut on his arm. Butcher was cleaning his rifle again. Izuku sat in the back, staring at his hands. They were covered in soot and Tech Knight's blood. He closed his eyes and tried to summon the vestiges. He needed to talk to All Might. He needed to talk to the first user. He needed someone to tell him he was still a hero. But the void was silent. The connection was dead. He was alone with the butchers. Back at the warehouse, Homelander walked through the wreckage. He saw Tech Knight's body. He saw the terrified staff. He saw Crimson Countess hiding behind a desk, sobbing. He walked up to her. He grabbed her face in his hand. He asked where they went. She stammered. She gave him a description of the van. She told him the boy was strong. stronger than anyone except him. Homelander smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. He let her go. He walked to the nursery window. He looked at the babies floating in the cribs. He looked at the cameras in the corner of the room. He had an idea. A script. He turned to the head scientist, who was cowering in the doorway. He told the scientist to kill the power to the incubators. The scientist protested, saying the infants needed the regulation fields, or they would die. Homelander's eyes glowed red. He repeated the order. The scientist obeyed. The hum of the machinery died. The babies began to cry, then seize. Homelander walked out of the room. He pulled out his phone. He dialed Ashley. He told her to prep a press conference. He told her to write a statement. The headline: The alien terrorist slaughtered 20 infants in a Vought medical facility. Tech Knight died trying to save them. He hung up. He looked at the sky. He felt a thrill of anticipation. The boy was moral. He had seen the footage. The boy tried to save people. This lie wouldn't just hurt his reputation. It would break his mind. And when the boy broke, he would come to Homelander. And then they would have a real fight. In the van, Frenchie's scanner beeped. He looked at the screen and turned pale. He told Butcher that the police bands were lighting up. He told them what the news was reporting. The massacre at the nursery. Izuku heard him. He opened his eyes. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. The shock was too great. He had saved them. He had taken the missile. And now they were dead. And the world thought he did it. Something inside Izuku snapped. Not a break, but a hardening. The naive hope that the truth would prevail died in that van. He realized that in this world, the truth didn't matter. Only power mattered. And if he wanted to save anyone, if he wanted to survive, he had to stop playing by the rules of a comic book that didn't exist here. He looked at Butcher. Butcher was watching him, waiting for the explosion. Izuku didn't explode. He reached out and took the regulator chip from Frenchie. He held it in his hand. "Build a harness," Izuku said. His voice was flat, cold. Butcher raised an eyebrow. "And then?" Butcher asked. Izuku looked out the back window at the shrinking silhouette of the city. "And then we kill the king," Izuku said. The van drove on into the night, carrying a boy who was learning that to defeat monsters, you sometimes have to walk in the dark with them. The escalation was complete. There was no going back. The war for the soul of the world had begun. The basement smelled of burning ozone and stale sweat. It was a scent that had become the permanent backdrop of Izuku Midoriya's life in this new world. He sat shirtless on the stained medical chair while Frenchie worked on his back. The harness was a crude, ugly thing. It was a mesh of copper wiring, lead shielding, and stolen Stark-grade capacitors, woven into a vest that dug into his skin. Frenchie was soldering the final connection points directly to the sensory nodes of the costume, but the interface required contact with Izuku's skin to mask the bioelectric signature. Frenchie muttered to himself, his goggles reflecting the sparks. He explained that the device acted as a Faraday cage for the soul. It would absorb the excess radiation Izuku leaked, storing it in the capacitors. But there was a catch. If the capacitors filled up, they would discharge into Izuku. It would hurt. It would feel like being cooked from the outside in. And while wearing it, Izuku could not use more than 5% of his power. If he went over 5%, the fuses would blow, the masking would fail, and Vought would have a lock on them instantly. Izuku nodded. He didn't complain. He looked at his arms. The scars from his battle with Shigaraki were still there, but now they were joined by fresh bruises from A-Train and the burns from the missile. He felt older, much older than the 16 years on his birth certificate. He looked over at Butcher, who was loading magazines with armor-piercing rounds. The bullets were tipped with depleted uranium. Butcher caught his eye. He didn't smile. He tossed a magazine to Mother's Milk. The plan was simple. Insane, but simple. Today was the Vought International Annual Shareholder Summit. It was being held in the main atrium of Vought Tower. Every major investor, every politician in the Vaught's pocket, and the entire roster of the 7 would be there. Homelander would be on stage. It was the only time he would be stationary and surrounded by people he theoretically couldn't kill on live television. They weren't going to shoot him. Bullets didn't work. They were going to poison him. Frenchie had synthesized a gas based on the analysis of Soldier Boy's old data files and the unique bioelectric frequency Izuku emitted. The theory was that Izuku's energy disrupted the stability of Compound 5. If they could pump a concentrated aerosol version of that frequency-carrying agent into the ventilation system during the speech, it might depower Homelander long enough for Izuku to restrain him, or for Butcher to kill him. Butcher called it Operation Kingslayer. Izuku called it a desperate gamble. They loaded into a stolen catering van. Huey was driving, his knuckles white on the wheel. He was wearing a waiter's uniform. Starlight had provided the clearance codes before she went dark. She was inside the tower, playing her part, smiling for the cameras while terrified out of her mind. Izuku sat in the back, the harness heavy on his chest. He pulled his tattered green hood up. He wasn't entering as a waiter. He was cargo. The drive into Manhattan was tense. The city was on high alert. Checkpoints were everywhere. Soldiers with Geiger counters scanned cars for the alien radiation. When they reached the checkpoint for the tower, Izuku held his breath. He channeled his energy inward, suppressing the hum of One for All, until it was a faint whisper. The soldier ran the scanner over the side of the van. It beeped once, then settled. The harness was working. The soldier waved them through. They pulled into the loading dock. The noise of the city disappeared, replaced by the sterile hum of the tower's logistics center. Huey and got out to unload the catering supplies, which were actually canisters of the gas disguised as helium tanks for balloons. Izuku stayed hidden in a false bottom of a food cart. He felt the cart being pushed, the vibration of the wheels on the smooth concrete. He heard the voices of Vought employees complaining about overtime and the mandatory loyalty oaths. They reached the service elevator. The doors closed. The cart stopped. The lid opened. Izuku sat up, gasping for air. They were on the maintenance floor, 40 stories up. The ventilation hub was here. Frenchie immediately went to work on the HVAC interface, his fingers flying over the keypad. Butcher stood guard by the door, his rifle hidden under a long coat. "We have 20 minutes until the speech," Butcher whispered. "The gas needs 5 minutes to circulate. We time it so the concentration peaks when the bastard is mid-sentence." Izuku walked to the edge of the room, looking at the schematics on the wall. He felt a knot of dread in his stomach. The plan relied on too many variables. It relied on Homelander breathing. It relied on the ventilation system not having chemical scrubbers. It relied on them not being seen. His danger sense gave a low thrum. Not an attack, but a presence. He looked at the ceiling vent. Something was moving in the shafts. Not a human, something smaller. A drone or a rat. He ignored it. He had to trust the plan. 10 minutes passed. The gas canisters were hooked up. Frenchie gave the thumbs up. The timer was set. They moved to the extraction point, a fire stairwell that led to the sub-basement. But as they opened the door, they froze. Standing in the stairwell was not a guard. It was Queen Maeve. She looked tired. Her armor was scuffed. She held a sword in one hand, but she wasn't raising it. She looked at Butcher, then at Izuku. "Get out," she said. Her voice was rough. "He knows." Butcher raised his rifle. "How does he know?" "He smells it," Maeve said. "He smelled the ozone on the kid from the moment you entered the city limits. He's playing you. He wants you to release the gas." "Why?" Izuku asked, stepping forward. "If it hurts him, why would he let us?" "Because he wants an excuse." Maeve looked at Izuku with pity. "He's tired of being loved, kid. He wants to be feared. If you attack him with a chemical weapon in a room full of senators and billionaires, he becomes the victim, and then he becomes the executioner. He will burn this tower down and blame it on you." Butcher sneered. He didn't believe her. He said she was trying to save her own skin. He pushed past her. Maeve grabbed his arm. Her grip was like steel. "Don't do it, Butcher. There are 3,000 people in that atrium." Butcher pulled the trigger on the detonator anyway. A hiss echoed through the ventilation shafts. The gas was released. Maeve cursed and shoved Butcher against the wall. But it was too late. The chemical was already moving through the ducts. In the main atrium, Homelander stood at the podium. The applause was deafening. He smiled, that tight, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He paused, tilting his head as if listening to a distant song. He smelled the air, a faint metallic scent mixed with the smell of ozone. The gas. He didn't hold his breath. He took a deep lungful. The crowd watched him. Silence fell. They expected a speech. Homelander coughed. It was a wet, heavy sound. He stumbled back from the podium. The gas was working. It was affecting him. His skin turned pale. Veins bulged in his neck. The crowd gasped. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the room. But Homelander didn't fall. He gripped the sides of the podium, the wood splintering under his fingers. He looked up at the camera, his eyes streaming with tears from the chemical irritation. "They're here," he rasped. "The terrorists. They're poisoning us." Panic. Instant and absolute. The doors to the atrium locked automatically. A security protocol Homelander had initiated himself moments before taking the stage. The shareholders, the politicians, the press. They were trapped. The gas began to fill the room, a thin, visible mist. It wasn't lethal to humans, just a mild irritant. But they didn't know that. They screamed. They pounded on the doors. Up in the maintenance room, Izuku watched the monitor. He saw the panic. He saw the doors lock. "He locked the doors," Izuku said, horror dawning on him. "He's using the people as shields." Butcher was already moving. Plan B. We go in. We hit him while he's sick. Izuku grabbed Butcher's shoulder. "We can't fight in there. The people. We don't have a choice." Butcher roared, shoving Izuku back. "He's weak right now. It's the only shot we'll ever get. If we run, he recovers, and he hunts us down. If we go in, maybe we kill him before he kills everyone else." Izuku looked at the monitor. He saw Starlight in the crowd. She was trying to blast the doors open, but they were reinforced with zinc alloy. She was trapped too. Izuku made a choice. A small choice in the grand scheme of war, but a massive one for his soul. He reached up and tore the harness off his chest. The copper wires snapped. The capacitors sparked and died. The weight lifted. One for all flooded his body, not at 5%, but at 45%. The green lightning exploded outward, shattering the lights in the maintenance room. "I'm not going to kill him," Izuku said, his voice vibrating with power. "I'm going to get them out." He didn't wait for Butcher's permission. He turned to the floor. He raised his leg. He brought his heel down in a Manchester smash. The floor disintegrated. The concrete slab collapsed, taking Izuku with it. He fell through the ceiling of the atrium, 40 floors below. He fell like a meteor. He crashed into the center of the stage, the impact wave blowing the podium apart and sending Homelander tumbling backward. Dust and debris filled the air. The crowd screamed louder, huddled against the back walls. Izuku stood up in the crater. Green lightning arced from his body, illuminating the dust. He looked at Homelander. Homelander was on his knees, coughing. The gas had weakened him, but not enough. He looked up at Izuku. His eyes were red, irritated, and filled with a hatred so pure, it felt like physical heat. "You," Homelander whispered. Izuku didn't monologue. He didn't lecture. He turned to the massive blast doors at the exit. He extended his hand. Black Whip shot out, weaving into a thick cable. He lashed it to the locking mechanism of the doors. He planted his feet. He pulled. The metal groaned. The gears ground against each other. Izuku screamed, channeling power into his back and legs. The doors began to bend. Homelander stood up. He wiped the mucus from his nose. He saw what the boy was doing. The boy wasn't attacking. He was saving the audience. He was ruining the narrative. If the people escaped, they would say the alien saved them. They would say Homelander did nothing. "No," Homelander said. He launched himself. He didn't use lasers. He used his body. He flew across the stage at the speed of sound and slammed into Izuku's back. The impact was cataclysmic. Izuku was thrown forward, smashing into the very doors he was trying to open. The metal buckled around him. He coughed blood. His spine felt like it had been compressed into dust. Danger sense hadn't warned him because the intention wasn't just to hurt. It was to stop the rescue. Homelander grabbed Izuku by the back of the neck and threw him toward the ceiling. Izuku smashed through the acoustic panels and the steel rafters, tumbling in the air. Homelander flew up after him, catching him in mid-air. He drove a fist into Izuku's stomach. The shockwave blew out the windows of the top 10 floors. Izuku gagged, his vision going white. He couldn't breathe. He tried to summon Black Whip, but Homelander was too fast. He was hitting Izuku with the force of a freight train, over and over again, keeping him suspended in the air above the atrium. "Bite back," Homelander screamed, his voice cracking. "Show them what a monster you are." Izuku realized the game. Homelander was keeping the fight visible. He wanted the crowd to see the violence. He wanted them to see Izuku destroy the building. Izuku gritted his teeth. He couldn't win a slugfest. He had to change the venue. He grabbed Homelander's wrist as the next punch came. He used the momentum. He activated float. He spun, swinging Homelander around and throwing him toward the upper balcony where the VIP boxes were. Homelander crashed into a luxury suite, demolishing it. Izuku dropped back to the stage. He landed on one knee. He looked at the crowd. Starlight had managed to melt the hinges of one door. People were squeezing out. "Go," Izuku roared. "Run." Butcher and the team appeared on the balcony above, firing down at Homelander as he emerged from the rubble. The bullets pinged off his chest uselessly. Homelander ignored them. He looked at the fleeing crowd. He looked at Izuku. He realized he was losing the audience. He made a decision. A choice that would end the age of heroes forever. "If you love them so much," Homelander said, his eyes glowing bright orange, "then save them." He looked up at the ceiling, not at the roof, but at the main support pillars that held the tower's upper mass, the thousands of tons of steel and glass directly above the atrium. Izuku's eyes widened. "No." Homelander fired. The laser beam sliced through the 4 main support columns like they were butter. The steel groaned. A sound like a dying wail echoed through the building. The top 30 floors of Vought Tower shifted. Gravity took hold. The entire upper section began to tilt inward, threatening to collapse directly into the atrium. The crowd stopped running. They looked up, paralyzed by the sight of the ceiling cracking, the massive chandelier falling. Izuku didn't think. He didn't calculate. He jumped. He shot up toward the falling ceiling. He activated Black Whip, sending hundreds of tendrils out, latching onto the crumbling debris, the steel beams, the concrete slabs. He pulled them all toward him, creating a web of tension. He positioned himself directly under the center of the collapsing mass. He activated One for All, 100%. The pain was instantaneous. His bones shattered. His muscles tore. He caught the falling building. He hung there in the air, a small green speck holding up a mountain of steel. The weight was crushing him. Every fiber of his being screamed. He was the only thing stopping the tower from pancaking the 3,000 people below. "Go!" he screamed, blood spraying from his mouth. "I can't. Hold it. Forever." Starlight saw him. She saw the sacrifice. She turned to the crowd and screamed at them to move. The people scrambled, trampling over each other, pouring out of the exits. Homelander floated nearby, watching. He crossed his arms. He looked impressed. "Look at you," he said softly. Atlas holding up the sky. Butcher fired a grenade launcher at Homelander from the balcony. It hit him in the shoulder. Homelander didn't flinch. He just turned and lasered the balcony. Butcher and the team dove for cover. The balcony collapsed. Izuku groaned. His vision was tunneling. He was losing consciousness. The weight was too much. He felt his arms breaking. He felt the vestiges screaming in his head, lending him their power, but it wasn't enough. The physics of this world were unforgiving. He needed a pivot. He needed a change. He saw the window. The exterior wall was compromised. If he could push the debris out instead of holding it up. He gathered the last of his energy. He used FA-Jin. He built up kinetic charge with every micro-tremor of his shaking muscles. Detroit. Smash. He didn't punch the debris. He punched the air pressure under the debris, angling it toward the broken wall. The blast of wind was like a nuclear detonation. It shoved the falling upper floors sideways. The top of the tower didn't fall on the atrium. It fell into the street. The noise was apocalyptic. The ground shook for miles. Dust swallowed Manhattan. Izuku fell. He had nothing left. He dropped from the air, his limbs useless, his body broken. He hit the stage hard. He didn't move. The atrium was empty of civilians. He had saved them. The dust began to settle. Homelander landed next to Izuku's broken body. He walked over and kicked Izuku in the ribs. Izuku gasped, a wet, rattling sound. Homelander looked around. The cameras were destroyed. The people were gone. But the narrative was salvageable. He knelt down. He leaned close to Izuku's ear. "You missed," Homelander whispered. "You aimed for the building. You should have aimed for me." He stood up. He smoothed his hair. He walked to the center of the ruins. He waited for the news crews to brave the dust. When the first camera crew entered the ruin lobby, coughing and filming, they saw Homelander. He was holding Izuku's limp body by the neck, lifting him off the ground. Homelander looked at the camera. He looked devastated. "I tried to stop him," Homelander lied, his voice breaking. "He brought the tower down. He tried to kill everyone. I had to put him down." He threw Izuku's body across the room like a bag of trash. The world watched, and the world believed. Butcher, bleeding from a head wound, watched from the shadows of the sub-basement access. He had a clear shot at Homelander's head, but he didn't take it. He saw Maeve pull Izuku's body into a maintenance hatch before Homelander could finish him off. Butcher lowered the gun. The kid was alive, barely. But the war was over. They had lost. Vought Tower had fallen. But the king was stronger than ever. And outside, on the streets, the people who hadn't been in the atrium, the people who only saw the tower fall, began to chant, "Homelander, Homelander." The sound rose like a storm. It was the sound of radicalization. It was the sound of the end of the world. Butcher spat blood on the floor. "Diabolical," he muttered. He turned and limped into the dark, following the trail of green blood that Maeve had left behind. They had to get the kid underground. They had to disappear. Because tomorrow, the hunt wouldn't just be for a terrorist. It would be a crusade. The city of New York had become a fortress. In the 3 weeks since the fall of Vought Tower, the skyline had changed. Drones patrolled every intersection. Banners hung from the remaining skyscrapers, red and blue tapestries bearing the golden face of Homelander. The news cycles were a 24-hour loop of the alien terrorist narrative, showing the collapse of the tower, the dust, and the bodies, all blamed on the boy in green. Martial law was not officially declared, but it was practiced. Curfews were enforced by soup squads. The Seven had been deputized as the supreme legal authority on American soil. Deep beneath the subway lines, in a forgotten Prohibition-era tunnel that smelled of mold and ancient rust, Izuku Midoriya lay on a makeshift operating table. He was awake, but he wished he wasn't. The pain was a living thing, a white-hot current that ran through every nerve ending. His arms were shattered. His spine had hairline fractures. His ribs were a jigsaw puzzle of calcifying bone. The only thing holding him together was Black Whip. The black tendrils were not acting as weapons now. They were woven into his very flesh, acting as sutures and splints, holding his broken body in the shape of a human. Queen Maeve sat in the corner, sharpening her sword. She looked older. The drinking had stopped, replaced by a hollow, focused stare. Butcher was pacing, the sound of his boots echoing in the damp dark. He was arguing with Frenchie about payload delivery systems. They were planning an assassination, not a capture, not a suppression, an execution. Izuku tried to sit up. The black whip tendrils creaked, tightening around his torso to support the movement. He gasped, the sound wet and ragged. Butcher stopped pacing. He looked at the kid. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered a grim nod. "You're up," Butcher grunted. "Good. We move at dawn." Izuku swung his legs off the table. His feet touched the cold concrete. He felt the vibration of a subway train passing miles above. He looked at his hands. They were scarred, trembling, and stained with the grime of the underground. "What is the plan?" Izuku asked, his voice a whisper. Butcher walked over to the map pinned to the rotting drywall. He pointed to Central Park. "Tomorrow is the victory rally," Butcher said. "He's gathering the faithful, millions of them. He's going to announce the annexation of the hero program into the military. Total control. He'll be on the main stage, exposed." "And?" Izuku asked. "And we're going to drop a tactical nuke on him," Butcher said. Izuku froze. He looked at Frenchie. Frenchie looked away, shame etched into his features. Izuku looked back at Butcher. "Sure, you don't have a nuke," Izuku said. "We found something close enough," Maeve interrupted. She stood up, sheathing her sword. Soldier Boy's old containment unit had a fail-safe core. Frenchie rigged it. "It's a radiological dirty bomb. We smuggle it under the stage. We detonate it. It fries the V out of his blood, and the blast radius takes out the command structure." "And the people?" Izuku asked. "The millions of people in the park?" Butcher slammed his hand against the wall. There is no clean way out of this, kid. He's won. Look around you. We're living in a sewer. The world loves him. If we don't kill him tomorrow, there won't be a world left to save. Just a playground for a god with a temper tantrum. Izuku stood up fully. He swayed, but the black tendrils caught him. He walked over to Butcher. He was shorter, broken, and dying, but he looked the man in the eye. "No bomb," Izuku said. Butcher laughed, a bitter, barking sound. "You're in no position to give orders, Deku. You can barely walk. You're done. You're a battery that's run out of juice." "I can fight," Izuku said. "You lost," Butcher shouted. "You hit him with everything you had, and he laughed at you. You dropped a building on him, and he walked out without a scratch. Physics doesn't work on him." Izuku closed his eyes. He thought about the battle in the tower. He thought about the feeling of his fist hitting Homelander's jaw. It was like hitting a mountain. But he remembered something else. He remembered the look in Homelander's eyes when the crowd started running. It wasn't anger, it was panic. Homelander didn't fear death. He feared irrelevance. He feared the silence. "I know how to beat him," Izuku said softly. Butcher glared at him. "How?" "By asking him nicely to stop. By giving him what he wants," Izuku said, "and then taking it away." The plan Izuku proposed was madness. It required precise timing, suicidal courage, and a fundamental understanding of Homelander's psychology that only another hero could possess. Butcher hated it. Maeve hated it. But it was the only plan that didn't involve mass murder. And deep down, Butcher knew that if they detonated a bomb in Central Park, they would just be creating a martyr. To kill the monster, they had to kill the myth. The sun rose over New York City, casting long shadows through the avenues. Central Park was a sea of humanity. People waved flags, they wore capes, they chanted his name. The stage was massive, a platform of gold and white erected in the great lawn. Behind it, a screen the size of a building displayed a looping video of Homelander saving cats, kissing babies, and holding the American flag. Backstage, the seven waited. The Deep was checking his reflection in a mirror. A-Train was vibrating with nervous energy, his leg braced in a high-tech cast. They were terrified. They knew the mood of their leader. Homelander was ecstatic, but his ecstasy was a razor's edge. One wrong word, one slip in the ratings, and the heat vision would come out. Homelander descended from the sky to the roar of the crowd. He landed on the stage, arms spread wide. The noise was deafening. He basked in it. He closed his eyes and drank it in like ambrosia. This was love. This was worship. This was right. He walked to the microphone. He smiled. "My people," he began, his voice smooth as velvet. "We have been through the fire together. We have seen the enemy. We have seen the alien hate that tries to destroy our way of life. But we are still here." The crowd cheered. "And today," Homelander continued, his eyes hardening, "we declare that we will never be victims again. Today, we take the gloves off." Suddenly, the massive screen behind him flickered. The image of the American flag distorted. Static cut through the audio system. The crowd muttered, confused. Homelander frowned, turning to look at the screen. He tapped his earpiece. "Cut the feed," he snapped. But the feed didn't cut. The image stabilized. It wasn't a video. It was a live stream. It was Izuku Midoriya. He was standing in the middle of the street in Times Square, 5 miles away. The area was cleared. The police had cordoned it off hours ago for the overflow crowd, but it was currently empty, save for the boy. He looked terrible. His suit was gone, replaced by street clothes, jeans, and a hoodie that were torn and bloodied. He stood alone, facing a Vought jumbotron. Homelander. Izuku's voice boomed through the speakers in Central Park. The crowd in the park went silent. They looked from the screen to the real Homelander on stage. Homelander's face twitched. "I'm waiting for you," Izuku said. "No hostages, no buildings, just you and me, unless you're afraid to finish what you started." Homelander laughed. He leaned into the microphone. "You think I'm afraid of you? You're a broken toy." "Then come get me," Izuku said. "Or are you only brave when you have an audience to clap for you?" The crowd murmured. The challenge was direct. It was insulting. Homelander looked at the faces in the front row. He saw a flicker of doubt. They wanted to see their god smite the devil. They wanted the spectacle. Homelander's eyes glowed red. He smiled, a terrifying rictus of anticipation. "Don't go anywhere," he whispered into the mic. "I'll be right back." He launched himself into the air. The sonic boom shattered the windows of the stage equipment. He was gone, a blue streak tearing across the Manhattan skyline. In Times Square, Izuku watched the sky. He could hear the approach. It sounded like a missile. He adjusted the earpiece in his ear. "He's incoming," Izuku said. "Are you ready?" In a van parked 3 blocks away, Frenchie's hands flew across a mixing board. "We are set. The jammers are active. The cameras are hacked. We control the broadcast." Izuku took a deep breath. He activated One for All. He didn't have much left. The stockpile was erratic, the embers fading. His body was too damaged to hold the higher percentages. But he didn't need to win a physical fight. He needed to survive long enough to win the argument. Homelander arrived. He didn't land. He crashed. He slammed into the pavement 20 yards from Izuku, creating a crater that sent cars tumbling. He rose from the dust, his cape fluttering. He looked at Izuku with pure disgust. "You chose Times Square?" Homelander sneered. "A bit cliché, isn't it?" "I chose it because everyone is watching," Izuku said. He was right. Every screen in Times Square, every billboard, every phone was broadcasting this fight. And thanks to Frenchie's hack, the feed was unedited. No Vought delay, no commentary, just the raw reality. Homelander walked forward. "You want to die on television? Fine, I can do that." He fired his lasers. Izuku didn't dodge. He used the second user's quirk, gear shift. He shifted the speed of the air in front of him, creating a dense refractive lens. The lasers hit the air pocket and bent, scattering into the sky. Homelander blinked. He hadn't seen that before. Izuku moved. He didn't attack. He closed the distance, slipping under Homelander's guard. He placed a hand on Homelander's chest. Smoke screen. Purple smoke exploded from Izuku's body, enveloping them both. It was thick, choking, and mixed with the chemical agent Frenchie had synthesized, not to depower Homelander, but to irritate his senses, to make him sloppy. Homelander roared, swinging blindly. His fist connected with a newsstand, vaporizing it. "Where are you, you little rat?" Izuku's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the smoke. "Why do you do it?" Izuku asked. Homelander spun, firing lasers at the sound. "Do what? Save the world from filth like you?" "No," Izuku said. "Why do you need them to love you?" Homelander froze. The question was intimate. It was a violation. "I am their father," Homelander shouted. "I am the only thing standing between them and the dark." "You're the one making the dark," Izuku replied. He appeared from the smoke, landing a kick to Homelander's knee. It didn't break bone, but it buckled the joint. Homelander snarled and grabbed Izuku's leg. He slammed the boy into the ground. The pavement cracked. Izuku coughed blood, but he locked his eyes on Homelander's. "You're lonely," Izuku wheezed. Homelander punched him in the face. The impact rattled Izuku's brain. But Izuku rolled with it, using Black Whip to pull himself back. "Shut up," Homelander screamed. He flew at Izuku, tackling him through the front window of a Disney store. Glass and plush toys exploded everywhere. Homelander was on top of him, hands around Izuku's throat. "I am a god," Homelander spat, his saliva hitting Izuku's face. "I don't have feelings. I have purpose." Izuku gasped for air, his hands gripping Homelander's wrists. He wasn't trying to pry them off. He was holding on. "Then why? Are you crying?" Izuku choked out. Homelander paused. He touched his cheek. There was moisture there. Irritation from the smoke. Or something else. The hesitation cost him. Izuku activated F.A. Jin. He had been building up the kinetic energy from every hit he took. He released it all in a single burst. Not outward, but upward. He bucked his hips, launching Homelander off him and through the ceiling of the store. Izuku scrambled to his feet. He stumbled out into the street. He was barely standing. His vision was swimming. Homelander descended again. He looked unhinged now. His hair was messy. His suit was torn. The mask of the perfect savior was slipping. "You want the truth," Homelander screamed, his voice amplifying over the silent city. "You want to know what I am. I am the purity. I am the end. I can do whatever I want." He looked at the cameras surrounding them. He looked at the millions of people watching on the screens. "I can kill you all," he shouted at the cameras. "I can burn this whole city to ash. And you will still love me, because you're terrified of what happens when I'm gone." The silence in Times Square was absolute. The silence in Central Park was absolute. He had said it. He had said the quiet part out loud. He wasn't a protector. He was a hostage taker. Izuku stood up straight. He wiped the blood from his mouth. This was it. The moment of vulnerability. "No," Izuku said. "They won't." Izuku began to glow. It wasn't the green lightning of full cowl. It was something deeper. A golden light, warm and ancient. He was accessing the core of One for All. He was reaching past the physical stockpile, past the quirks, into the realm of the vestiges. He didn't plan to punch Homelander. He planned to share with him. Homelander charged. He was flying at Mach speed, intent on turning Izuku into a red mist. Izuku didn't move. He held his ground. He waited until the last microsecond. Transfer. Izuku didn't transfer the power permanently. He forced a connection. As Homelander's fist made contact with Izuku's chest, Izuku grabbed Homelander's head with both hands. For a single second, the physical world fell away. They were in the vestige world, the realm of One for All. Homelander stood in a void of swirling colors. He looked around, confused. He wasn't in Times Square. He was nowhere. Then they appeared. Yoichi, the second, the third, Hikage, Banjo, and Nana, all might. They towered over Homelander. They were ghosts of true heroism. They were people who had suffered, sacrificed, and died for others without asking for applause. They looked down at the man in the flag cape with a mixture of pity and judgment. Homelander stepped back. "Who are you? Get away from me." Nana Shimura stepped forward. She didn't speak with words. She spoke with emotion. She projected the true feeling of a hero, the selflessness, the love that asks for nothing in return. It hit Homelander like a physical blow. He had never felt this. He had only known transactional love, love for ratings, love for fear. This pure, unadulterated empathy was foreign. It was agonizing. It highlighted the vast, gaping hole in his own soul. Then came the judgment. The collective weight of 8 generations of heroes weighed his soul and found it wanting. They showed him his victims, not as statistics, but as people. The fear he caused, the pain. Homelander screamed. He fell to his knees in the void. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a psychological deconstruction. His narcissism couldn't survive the glare of absolute truth. His ego fractured. "Get out of my head," he shrieked. In the real world, the impact happened. A shockwave of golden light exploded from Times Square. Windows shattered for 10 blocks. The ground rippled like water. When the light faded, the two figures were standing in the center of the crater. Izuku was standing, but only just. His eyes were dim. The embers of One for All were almost gone. He had burned the candle at both ends to force the connection. Homelander was on his knees. He wasn't physically injured. There wasn't a mark on him, but his eyes were wide, staring at nothing. He was catatonic. His mind, unable to process the influx of genuine empathy and the weight of his own sins, had shut down. He was trapped in a loop of self-reflection he couldn't escape. Izuku stumbled forward. He fell, catching himself on Homelander's shoulder. He looked at the cameras. "He's not a god," Izuku whispered, his voice carried by the wind. "He's just a man, and he's broken." Izuku collapsed. The world watched in stunned silence. The feed cut. Minutes later, a black van screeched into the square. Butcher, Maeve, and MM jumped out. They ran to the crater. Butcher aimed his rifle at Homelander's head. He waited for the movement. He waited for the lasers. Homelander didn't move. He was drooling slightly, staring at the pavement, muttering, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over again. Butcher lowered the gun. He looked at Izuku. The kid was unconscious. His breathing was shallow. His hair, once vibrant green, was dull. The lightning was gone. "Is he dead?" Huey asked, running up behind them. Maeve checked Izuku's pulse. "No, but he's empty. I can't feel the hum anymore. The power, it's gone." Butcher looked at Homelander. He looked at the Vought helicopters circling above, unsure whether to attack or rescue. "Load him up," Butcher said, pointing to Izuku. "What about him?" Maeve asked, looking at Homelander. "Do we finish it?" Butcher looked at the broken god. He spat on the ground near Homelander's boots. "No," Butcher said. "Death is too easy. Let him live with what the kid showed him. Let him rot in his own head. Besides, look." He pointed to the giant screens. The news was already spinning. But they weren't spinning it for Homelander. They were showing the clip of him screaming, "I can kill you all." They were showing the fear. The illusion was shattered. Vought stock was plummeting. The spell was broken. "We leave him," Butcher said. "He's not Homelander anymore. He's just a patient." They loaded Izuku into the van and sped away, leaving the most powerful being on Earth kneeling in the wreckage of his own image, broken not by a punch, but by a revelation. 3 months later, the basement was quiet. The war was over, or at least the hot war was. Vought was under federal investigation. Stan Edgar had been ousted. Homelander was in a supermax psychiatric facility, heavily sedated, staring at walls. Izuku sat in a wheelchair by the small window that let in a sliver of sunlight. He was reading a book. His arms were still in casts, but they were healing. Butcher walked in. He held 2 beers. He handed one to Izuku. "I don't drink," Izuku said. "It's root beer," Butcher lied. It wasn't. Butcher sat on a crate. "So, Frenchie says the portal theory is solid. Stark Industries or whatever equivalent exists in your world. The energy signature you left when you arrived is still lingering. We might be able to send a signal. Get your people to open the door from their side." Izuku nodded. "That would be good." Butcher looked at the kid. "You know you can't go back to being a hero, right? Not without the juice. Maeve says you burned it all out. You're normal, just a civilian. Izuku looked at his hands. He felt the absence of the power, the silence where the vestige used to be. He was quirkless again, just like he was at the start. He smiled. It was a genuine smile. I was a hero before I had the power, Mr. Butcher, Izuku said. And I think I did what I came here to do. Butcher took a swig of his beer. He looked at the kid who had done what armies couldn't. He had taken the cynicism of their world and broken it against the rock of his own idealism. He hadn't won a clean victory. The city was scarred. People had died. Izuku was permanently disabled. But Homelander was gone. And for the first time in decades, the world wasn't afraid to look up at the sky. You're a right proper cunt, Butcher said affectionately. Izuku laughed. He looked out the window at the feet of the people walking by on the street above. They were walking without fear. It's not a clean victory, Izuku thought. But it's a tomorrow, and that's enough. He closed his book. The timeline was secure. The anomaly was resolved. The boy who fell from the sky had saved the world, not by punching it into submission, but by reminding it that even monsters are just men who have forgotten how to be human. The rain on the roof of the Flatiron building felt different tonight. It washed away the grime of a city that had spent decades drowning in corporate gloss and blood. 6 months had passed since the showdown in Times Square. The world was not fixed. Vought still had lawyers. The politicians were still corrupt. But the silence was gone. The fear of looking up had vanished. The gods had been proven mortal, and humanity had exhaled for the first time in a generation. On the wet rooftop, surrounded by coils of heavy copper wire and humming generators, Frenchie made the final adjustments to the dimensional relay. It was a chaotic mess of Stark Tech theory and Vought hardware, a beacon designed to punch a hole through the multiverse just big enough for a signal. Or a boy. Izuku Midoriya stood by the edge of the roof, looking out at the city one last time. He wore a simple jacket and jeans. He looked small, without the hum of One for All beneath his skin. He was just a teenager with too many scars and a limp that would never fully heal. But his eyes were clear. The shadows that had haunted him since his arrival had lifted. Butcher stood next to him, smoking a cigarette, shielding the ember from the drizzle. He didn't look at Izuku. He looked to the skyline, where the construction cranes were already dismantling the ruins of Vought Tower. He took a long drag and exhaled smoke into the night air. He asked if Izuku was sure about this. He said the machine might just scatter his atoms across the void. He said staying here wasn't a death sentence anymore. The boys had a place for him, a tactical advisor, a moral compass maybe, though Butcher admitted he would probably ignore it. Izuku smiled. He said he had to go back. He had a mum waiting. He had friends, and he had a promise to keep, even if he didn't have the power to keep it the same way anymore. He turned to Butcher. He thanked him. He said that for a world so determined to be cruel, he found people who were surprisingly kind. Butcher scoffed. He flicked the cigarette butt over the edge. He told the kid not to ruin his reputation. He said kindness was a weakness. Izuku shook his head. He said kindness was the only thing that survived the blast. The machine whirred to life. The air grew heavy with ozone, a familiar scent that made everyone flinch instinctively. A tear in reality opened in the center of the copper ring. It wasn't violet and violent like the one that brought him. It was white and stable. Through the haze, the faint outline of a dormitory could be seen. Voices calling out a name. Uraraka. Ida. Frenchie shouted that the window was stable but short. Izuku adjusted his backpack. He shook hands with Huey, who looked like he was losing a brother. He hugged Mem. He nodded to Frenchie and Kimiko. Then he stood before Butcher. There were no grand speeches. Butcher just nodded. He told the kid to give him hell. Izuku stepped onto the platform. He looked back one last time. He said the world didn't need a symbol of peace. It just needed people who refused to look away. He stepped into the light. The machine sparked, whined, and then cut out. The light vanished. The boy was gone. Butcher stood alone in the rain for a long time. The city below was noisy, dirty, and chaotic. It was a mess. But it was their mess now. No supers, no gods, just people. He turned to leave, a rare, faint smirk touching his lips. He muttered that the kid was all right. Then he walked back into the shadows to finish the job, knowing that somewhere across the stars, the story continued.